we're going to be looking at John 8:31 and 32, and Jesus said, to those Jews who had believed, if you abide in my word, hold fast to my teachings, and live in accordance with them, you are truly my disciples. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So as part of developing a worldview, we need to understand what truth really is. Worldview is just a set of assumptions that we hold about the basic makeup of the world. What is the nature of reality? Some worldviews assume that reality is fundamentally material. Some think that it's fundamentally spiritual. We're going to talk about what happens to us at death. Just terminate? Are we held in a spiritual limbo? So what happens when we die? And what's the basis of our values or our morals? Is it the character, or is it simply the strongest will survive? Who's got the strongest instinct? Now, having a worldview is like having a heart. You can get your whole life, you can go your whole life without talking about your heart or seeing it operate. But everyone has one. And it is operating in you and on you all the time. In the same way, you can hold your assumptions about the world for years and never question them, never give them any thought. But for most of history, this is the way it is. For most of us, that's the way we do it. Most people would live their whole life and not travel more than 20 miles from their hometown, which means you could cradle to grave and never meet anyone who disagreed with your assumptions about the world. You just take your worldview for granted. But today, thanks to technology and travel and all that other stuff, our worldview is very, very different. We deal all over the world. So whereas maybe your grandparents didn't think about Islam or secular humanism or Zen Buddhism or Oprah Winfreyism, these days you can't go a day without an alien worldview being thrown in your TV, on Facebook, in the movies. Well, if you're a rational and humble person, all this exposure to other worldviews leads to questions like, are my assumptions about the world right just because my assumptions? Just because they're the answers that I absorb from my family or culture, does that make them right? So today, Christianity is not the only worldview opinion available to a humble, rational person. We live in a world where Christianity has to compete in a marketplace of worldviews. And the question is, can it compete? For those of you in investigation mode, that's the money question, right? Does Christianity have a rational basis? Are its assumptions warranted based on the evidence of this world? Does it do the best job of collecting all the available data about the world into an operating theory that A, works, and B, is logically consistent, and C, corresponds to reality? In short, is it true? For those of you who are Christians, the series will challenge you. I already assume a Christian worldview, so how will it challenge me, you say? Because every reason we present to believe it's true, it's a reason to live more boldly following Jesus and less ashamed or cowed by other views. To both believers and seekers, I say this: for a person to be intellectually honest, you should not only be able to detect the worldview of other people, but you should know exactly why, in light of so many options, you think yours is true. So, what is truth? What exactly is truth? Well, now that one word true leads us to our topic, what is truth? When on trial, Jesus stood before Governor Pilate and said in John 18:37, for this reason I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth, and everyone on the side of truth listens to me. So it seems that the question, what is true, was of paramount importance to Jesus. He unambiguously claimed to be in possession of truth. Then he draws a line through the human race and says, If you want truth, you need to be on my side of this line. But I want you to notice what Pilate says to him. And no, this is not from a movie. He asks, what is truth? That sums up the tension in our day, isn't it? Is truth really true? Now, I know that already some of you have a problem because you don't think we should talk about truth and religion in the same sentence. There's too much disagreement and conflict. So we kind of side with Pilate and say, well, what is truth after all? You know, he believes it sincerely, and as long as he believes it sincerely, he must be right, right? And everybody has their own right to their own beliefs. Yeah. Well, when faced with the question, people answer in different ways. And I've come up with what I consider to be different animal metaphors to describe the different truth camps we fall into. Now, please understand, this is not high philosophy. I can't even say it. This is just helping you picture this. I think the first camp of truth is the ostrich camp. Okay? Their answer, truth is what internally consistent. An ostrich, when faced with danger or threat, will stick its head in the sand. Inside its own head, the ostrich has no problems. Its view of the world is consistent and logical. It might not match the world outside, but it doesn't matter as long as the truth is internally coherent. The view has a name. They call it the conference truth, view of truth. Second is the rainbow trout camp. Yep, rainbow trout. I know. Truth is relative to your context. The trout has a rainbow made up of all these different colors being reflected from the same white light. So for these people, truth may look and sound differently in different contexts. Somehow all truth claims are equally true or the same. This view has a name. They call it relativism. Third is the beaver camp. Yep, I said beaver camp. Truth is what works. A beaver makes dams and lodges, and that works for him. Even if it disrupts the ecosystem or environment of the forest he lives in, if it works for you, it's true, and a person who performed a native dance around their car every morning to protect it from deer collisions says, after 11 years, I've never hit a deer. I see it's true. That view has a name. It's called pragmatic view of truth. And the fourth is the crow camp. Truth is what corresponds to reality. A crow is a problem solver. They've been known to work through a 6-stage puzzle using tools and uncomfortable trial and error to get a food prize. This is the person who sees different worldviews, a puzzle of clues to sort out to find what's real. This view is called the correspondence view of truth. So which is your view of truth? Okay, so which one of these is your view of truth? Well, class, if this was Sesame Street, I would be singing, one of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong. Because 3 of these, the ostrich, the beaver, and the trout, all say that truth is something that is determined or chosen, and is determined in some sense subjectively by you. Only one of those truths is something to be discovered. That's the crow camp, the correspondence view of truth. If it's the truth, and only this argue that's correct. So why does it matter? Okay? Well, truth is determined or chosen, then of course it's silly to go about defending any worldview because there's so many truths as there are people who choose them. So why defend one thing as true? It's like defending the idea that red is the best color. Okay? If truth is discovered, though, that means that truth is independent of you. It's objective. It's absolutes. So attempting to find out these absolute truths matter. If truth is discovered, then it makes sense to do what Jesus said to do. 11, 9, and 10 says, ask and it shall be given to you, seek and you shall find, knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, but he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks the door will be open. if truth is discovered, it makes sense to seek out, even at the risk of losing of some cherished ideas. Because if truth corresponds to reality, it doesn't care about how you feel, about your context, or even if it works. It only cares about what is real. And since eternity might just be on the... I'd really say it's worth discovering, don't you? Now, but now let's ask, if we have reasons to define truth like the crow and not like the beaver, trout, or ostrich, do we have reasons to believe truth is objective and not subjective? We do, and the main reason is a little rule of logic called the law of non-contradiction. Now you're sitting here thinking, okay, Pastor Mike, what has this got to do with Scripture? Well, we're getting there. Just give me a chance. Okay. Have you heard of this? It goes like this. A thing cannot be both A and not A at the same time. Okay, you could look at it as an equation like this. If A is true, not A cannot be true. So input any proposition into the formula and you'll see how it works. A. The Space Needle is located in Seattle, Washington. B. If the Space Needle is located in Seattle, then it cannot be true that the Space Needle is not located in Seattle. Or Space Needle cannot be both in Seattle and not in Seattle at the same time. Sounds simple, right? Okay. It's very easy. But the problem is, when you start beginning in putting worldview propositions into the formula, take a simple idea like, Buddha offers the only way to a wonderful afterlife. If the Buddha offers the only way to a wonderful afterlife, it cannot be true that a non-Buddha offers the only way to a wonderful afterlife. God is personal. If God is personal, then it cannot be that God is impersonal. What this means is simply this. If two religions claim are mutually exclusive, meaning one affirms A and the other affirms non-A at the same time, they violate the law of non-contradiction. But in fact, people violate it all the time when they say things like, all religions are equally alike, all religious statements are equally valid, or all paths lead to God. Now, just because you're making religious claims doesn't make you exempt from the law of non-contradiction. To prove it, here's a true story of a Christian who was in a conversation with a Zen. He asked him the following question. If Jesus was right when he said that he was the only way of salvation, isn't it true that the Buddha cannot be the way of salvation? The man said, no, that's what's wrong with you Christians. Always someone wrong and someone right. Why can't it be that Christianity is true for you and Buddhism for me? Christian said, so you disagree with the law of non-contradiction. The law says A cannot equal not A. If you're saying it's true that Christianity is the only way, and it's true that non-Christianity, Buddhism, is also the only way, yes, he said, so what about the law of contradiction? Well, said the Buddhist, I don't believe in that law. It's a Western idea. The East doesn't accept it. The Christian says, okay, so you're telling me that you believe in a different law. Let's call it the law of relativism. The law could be, it could be this. A can equal non-A at the same time. Space Needle can be in Seattle and not in Seattle at the same time. Something can be true, and its opposite can also be true at the same time. Yes, the Buddhist said. Lack of law of non-contradiction is truly false. Let's call that law A. So you would mean that the law of contradiction was not A, right? Sure. So you're saying that because the law of relativism is true and the law of non-contradiction cannot be true. Yes, said the Buddhist. Do you realize what you just did? He's saying that relativism was true and for the opposite, non-contradiction, could not be true. But he used non-contradiction to disprove non-contradiction. Which shows just one thing. The law is absolute, just like gravity. We have a word for that, what the Buddhists tried to do. It's called self-defeating. It's like saying, I cannot speak any English. Let me give you another example. Nate, I did not do this to pick on you, okay? So just bear with me. All Canadians are liars. Okay. If you take my statement as true, you cannot take my statement as true. Okay. Because if Nate stands up and says all Canadians are liars, she's Canadian, she's either lying or she's not. If she's telling the truth, then she can't be lying, so she's not lying? Yes, everyone lies, Morgan. Let me do a better example. You guys ever watch Star Trek? You ever seen Star Trek? Okay, there's an episode on the old original series, and I mean, this just tells you how old I am. And it's called I, Mudd. Bunch of androids find Mudd, and they use him to kidnap the Enterprise. And so they come to the planet, and it's the funniest one of the series I remember. You know why? Because they defeat the aliens with stuff like this. They'll come up to the android, and they say, listen, Norman, I am lying. Always lie, and I am lying. But you can't be lying because you always lie. And if you always lie and you say I'm not lying, then you're telling the truth. But if you're always lying, you can't be telling the truth. And it ended up frying the android. I mean, he goes through all this logic. But the whole point is, one can't be true, and then the other, the opposite of it can't be true. Okay? So, what we have to come across here is, in trying to deny the law of contradiction, it asks you to accept the law of non-contradiction, disproving the point. I mean, any view of truth that asks you to violate the law of non-contradiction is false. Go back to the ostrich. Beaver, trout, and crow. Remember, to the ostrich view, you can believe something in your head, but it's not true outside your head. In the beaver view, you could see something working, but it's not in harmony with what's going on in the forest. In the rainbow view, you see all claims being somehow the same, even if they don't agree with each other. In each of these views, the truth, the law of non-contradiction, is violated. Something can be both A and not A at the same time. The ostrich can be sitting on a sunny beach with his head in the sand while he's really being eaten by a lion. Okay? He's not safe, even though he thinks he is. The beaver can be experiencing great benefits, believing he's not changing the forest, when he creates a problem and there's a flood and everything drowns. The rainbow trout can think that all the colors are one when clearly they're all very different. Each of these try to tell you that two mutually exclusive things are somehow both true. The Space Needle's in Washington, Seattle, Washington, and the Space Needle is not in Seattle. Well, it's in Seattle, Washington, so it can't not be inside of Washington. So it's a contradiction. It's self-defeating. And each of these try to tell you that two mutually exclusive ideas can somehow both be true. But since they violate the law of non-contradiction, both these views of truth are false. Truth is absolute. It's what corresponds to reality. Only the crow has it right, because only the crow says that what's true is simply what's real. Truth is harmony between the statement and reality. Well, no one disagrees with this when it comes to things that can be verified by science. But should we really hold this view when it comes to religion? Isn't truth and religion somehow different? So sure, all sane and educated people believe the earth is round. The idea corresponds to reality. And if you think the earth is flat, we say you're simply wrong. No, if, ands, and buts. Just wrong. False. We couldn't say, well, if logically it fits in your the earth is flat. Or, if it works to treat the earth as flat, well, then it's true. Or, being flat and round at the same time is possible. No, we would say, the earth is round and your brainwaves are flat. But in religion, we think the law of non-contradiction somehow doesn't exist. We look at all the competing religious ideas out there, and if we are held to the law of contradiction, we know those religions can't all be true. But that seems arrogant. It's so uncomfortable for people to admit this. Then try to get around it another way. A favorite illustration that'll help demonstrate this. You guys ever heard the story of the elephant? The elephant and the blind man? This says people in different religions are all groping around trying to find blind men groping an elephant. One has the tail, the other has the trunk, and each one gives wildly different descriptions of the true elephant. God is like a rope. God is like a hose. God is like a leaf. Which one is right? They seem mutually contradictory. But wait, in a way they're all right because they're all touching the same thing. So we're told, just like that, all religions are equally valid. Sorry. But they can't be all equally valid, can they? I mean, there's just simply no way. Let me put it this way. So sure, all sane and educated believe the earth is round. The idea corresponds to reality. We say, and if you think the earth is flat, and you're simply wrong. Okay? But in religion, somehow we think that's not a problem. And with the elephant, then we all get into this thing about all religions are equally valid. They just describe a different part of the God essence. And this gets around the non-contradiction law, remaining relativistic. Now, so because, well, there's a real and objective elephant, and that's reality. But our problem is that we understand only part of it. So it's our partial knowledge that creates the contradictions. But beneath it all, it's all one elephant, or God, we're trying to reach, right? It's an interesting analogy, but it happens to be another example of a self-defeating argument. Well, it says that all of us are blind people only grasping part of the truth. We're all just blind men describing gods subjectively. But wait a minute, who's telling us this? Is this the person also a blind man describing things subjectively? No, the person telling the elephant story makes an exception to their role for themselves. They stand above the situation telling you the truth. Can you see the contradiction? They're saying, oh, we're all blind, but let me tell you how reality is. If you are or you know a religious relativist, you have to grapple with this question. How do you know that God cannot be known? You see, in itself is a claim to know something, right? You know God so well that you know he would never reveal himself in any one religion. Well, who said? You must know a lot about God to know he would never limit himself to one way, one religion, or one Savior. What if God made himself known to only one nameless pygmy living in Africa in 1348? And that little guy is the only one with the truth about God. How do you know so much about God that you know he would never do that? How do you know so much about God that you would know? So the religious pluralist, in denying you the right to make truth claims about God, has made an enormous truth claim about God and cut off the branch they're sitting on in the process. Truth is absolute, and that corresponds to reality. So when truth claims are contradictory, one of two things is true. Either they're both false, or they're both, or only one of them's true. But they both can't be truth. We can't get around this by postulating the pineapple God theory or the elephant God theory or whatever other fruit you want to pick. They don't work because they're either postulate a self-defeating argument, all truth cannot be known, except for the statement I just made, or because they violate the inviolable law of non-contradiction. All these mutually contradictory things are true at the same time. So if you're with me, we're ready to ask the next question no one wants to ask. If truth is absolute, okay, which religion is true? We should be humble here, of course. The Christian admits that we see in the dark glass darkly. We know in part. But if truth is absolute, we should eagerly examine view options. So, what is truth?